Welcome everyone to a gaming and literacy loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be talking with the creative research and authoring team of Dr. Matthew Farber and Tracy Fullerton. Many thanks to you both for joining.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having us.
Absolutely. This is a fascinating concept to me, the world of multimodality, the world of gaming. I, of course, have lots of students who game. I have been a gamer and have followed the work of folks like Ito and Horst and James G. and some of those citational pieces. But delighted to be talking with the two of you about your work in this world. And by means of an origins question, just to orient our listeners, anything that you'd like to say about how you came to gaming and literacy and education?
Well, I
Um,
I started as a game designer, so that's and then became an educator, uh, sort of out of my practice of game design. Started teaching game design, and realized there wasn't a lot of you know codification of that. Really wasn't a lot of curriculum or understanding of how to teach game design as an art form. So then only later in my career did I become an educator and also, sort of marrying the fields of game design and education.
Nice. Matthew, how about you? How did you get into this work?
well, I guess when I started teaching social studies as in middle school prior to higher education, I was an early adopter of iCivics when it was our course, like that early, like that's as soon as it came out. And I just kept using different types of games in classrooms and got connected with folks in that space over the years. I've been through a fellowship that the Institute of Play ran once, like 8 years ago, 9 years ago. And I just continued writing about games for Edutopia and different books. And I think I know Tracy would probably agree, but like in this ever-changing landscape, I like, ooh, VR, like all these different things that pop up. It's like, just I stuck with games and learning. Because fundamentally play is what makes us human, one of the things that makes us human, and I'm sticking with that because it
Gosh,
works.
absolutely. There's something about the gaming world. There's something about imagined worlds, world building. It's highly engaging and creative. And the two of you have authored the Well-Read Game, Playing Thoughtfully. Your work has also been shared, as you mentioned, on Edutopia and other spaces. Let's give it the conference question. Please tell us about your theoretical paradigm. What is the foundation that you'd like to share the work? I believe Rosenblatt has a reference in this as well.
Just a couple.
Just a
Yes.
couple. I think it's more than a couple, but yeah, that's wonderful. So, I think maybe to answer your question roundabout, I should say that Matt and I came together in our shared love of play and learning when we basically we were working on a set of curriculum modules for a game that I designed about Henry David Thoreau's experience at Walden Pond called Walden a Game. And Matt and I had known each other and we'd been on panels together, but this was the first time we worked together significantly. And we wound up really talking about, you know, the kind of curriculum we wanted to build around this literary piece, this game that immersed students in the literary world of Walden. And we talked a lot about reflection and play and the kind of gameplay that Walden evoked, which was very different than a lot of different learning games. And one of the things we started to discuss was the sort of inner world of play that we felt a lot of players like ourselves had. We would discuss the games that we were playing, but really weren't valued. And we started digging into this, and I'm sure, Matt could talk about this, but we started talking about how resonant what we were finding was with the way that literary scholars talked about reader response to literary texts. And everything that we were thinking about and talking about in terms of games seemed to already have been written about and thought about when you look at the work of Louise Rosenblatt and other reader response theorists. And so we started thinking about, well, why don't we already think about games this way? I don't know if you want to add to that, Matt, but
Yeah.
yeah, build on that.
So like again, I was an early adopter of using games, like the applied part of it, I guess, in the classroom. And like going back to maybe like 2012, 2013, there was this idea that instead of games, games could teach if the players' mechanics, like what they're doing in the game, are aligned with the learning outcome, and then you could pop a dashboard on it. And to me, it just seemed like this, like it was all becoming like this, I don't know, a fancy like phonics book, basically. Um, and I was playing games also, as in my personal life, and thinking about how the experiences really like stuck with me the way they would with books and films, especially longer form storytelling. And I thought there was more there than just the systems. The systems are obviously there, but much of the research, and I don't want to say noise, but I guess the volume of things in the space tends to do with systems thinking and computational thinking, STEM, things like that. And I was thinking more about the humanities, especially I guess coming from teaching social studies and thinking about literacy, where that can fit in. At the same time, writing, right? Every time I would write a literature review, I would have to write this, you write like the same things often. And one thing was that you'd write that games are different than other media from other media because they're interactive. Then you'd always have to write, but books are also interactive in the way of how you interpret a text and the usual citations, right? You'd talk about theory of mind there. Then you would talk about TV and film, the way you would, like reception theory and interpret it. And then we go on with the rest of the research or whatever else I was writing at the time. And I kept always thinking in the back of my mind, well, isn't that the same with games? Like if I'm playing The Last of Us Part 2, yeah, there's a system and it's interactive to what I'm doing. But aren't I also having a personal response to it based on my lived experience? Why aren't we talking about that? And almost nobody was talking about that. But an interesting thing happens when you develop, I'm sure this has happened to you. I know you've had that wonderful curriculum, the Great Immigrants curriculum for
Yes.
NCTE, the graphic novel,
Hmm.
right? And like when you're
Hmm.
developing curriculum like that, it's sort of like a book club. Like you really talk about it and get deep in those things. And I've done that before with somebody else about another game. And with Tracy, we were talking for a long time about the curriculum around walled in a game EDU and, developing lessons around that. And this light bulb started to go off and like at both of our heads at the same time that we should write this book.
Exactly. Yeah.
And here we are on your podcast.
Sure. I'm so glad that it's out there and so glad that you've written this. I remember the first college class I ever had the chance to sit in on. It was a literature class that was exploring Walden Pond, or Walden. And I thought, what a cool guy was this Thoreau who gets put in prison for not paying his taxes. He was like the leather jacket of literature to me. And then of course I found out that he only spent like a night in jail and all of that. So my badass image of him was somewhat diminished, but brilliant to kind of take a game approach to something like that, where, I mean, we talk about open world exploring and open world building in games. He was very much that way in terms of the philosophical approach as well. So smart linking
Yes.
there.
And the interesting thing about, I mean, we won't spend the whole time talking about Thoreau, but he was also an educator, right? And he and his
Hmm.
brother had an experimental school where they would take students out walking in the woods, which I just thought was wonderful. But the inspiration there was to create a game experience that explored his philosophy. Didn't tell you didactically how to think, right? But
Mhm.
rather put you in the situation of the experiment in living that he was playing out at the pond, and sort of give you the opportunity to develop your own responses to that situation. And so again, that's where Matt and I were creating this curriculum, and we wanted to create curriculum that had that same open-endedness, right? That was about the student's response to the game, and didn't tell them what to think, because Thoreau would have hated if we told them what to think, right?
Mhm.
But really asked them to build personal responses around the experiences as they had in the game.
Now, the quick skinny on Rosenblatt for listeners that haven't Rosenblatted recently is that an individual reader interacts with an author across a text and thereby uh, creating this new experience, author and reader, that's completely unique to everyone, even though there's a universal kind of concept with the book, even though it can reach masses, it touches each of us individually. So, in terms of the findings, in terms of sharing this and appreciating this, how did you go about collecting that work and researching?
So we actually sent out a survey to our students and our friends, and colleagues, and we asked them to essentially send us portions of their own journals and responses to games, and to describe, if they hadn't already written about them, to describe particular moments of gameplay that struck them across any genre. Like, we didn't actually ask them to, be in a narrative-based genre at all. We just said, describe it to us as if you were describing a dream to a friend, right? And that produced the kind of readings that we were looking for. And we got such a wide response, and everything from undergraduate students to famous game designers, and writing to us about their experiences with games.
And that was the prompt. It was that simple, actually,
Yeah,
on purpose.
yeah. We didn't want to say it's only this type of game, right? The book is also filled with our own readings, which of course inform, as it should, in a book that is so deeply, engaged with reader response. It's a lot of the foundational thinking is based in our own uh, experiences with games, and Matt and I spent a long time sharing those, and in some cases we show how different like my response to a game is versus Matt's response to a game, or you know ways in which some people might play against the intended narrative or intended experience of a game. So, there's a lot that's our own, and then there's a lot that comes from our sort of network of people. And then there are also really beautiful examples coming from the history of game studies. So people weren't necessarily calling them readings. Sometimes they do. But we just sort of found some really interesting moments. We thought, oh, this is a reading, even though this writer isn't calling it a reading.
And in Rosenblatt's words, she uses terms like efferent reading and aesthetic reading, right? So efferent reading, I mean, just to paraphrase, is when you're reading for the like basically the strict meaning of it. But it could also be, we may do efferent reading when you're reading instructions on how to cook a recipe or something like that. And then there's the aesthetic reading, which is more open, where it may invite uh, it may invite a like th like an ellipsis, as Henry Jenkins calls it, like where it's open to interpretation, to read between the thoughts and lines and all that, but also then to reflect upon your own lived experience there. And when you think about different types of games, and if you think of the different types of games you may have played, it's not that you think about, did you win or your score of the game? It's the experience you had while playing the game. Maybe the experience you had at the time when you played the game too. Like when we read and reread at different times in our lives, the same
Yeah,
text. And then there are different games, just like there are different books that invite a more aesthetic reading.
exactly. Be interesting. So we're right now editing a journal. We're editing a special edition of uh, the Well Played journal called. It's so hard because it's called Well Read, Well Played, uh,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
in it we have even more. So we basically, having published the book, now we sort of invited an even wider range of people to produce readings, and so I've been sort of fascinated in seeing the kinds of games that people have proposed articles about and have written articles about that we would have never thought, I think, to include. And it's like everything from Missile Command and a sort of reading of a of Missile Command from a player who was obsessed with the game during the Cold War, growing up in the Cold War, right? Um, to um, uh, uh, sort of Latin American professor reading soccer across the various times in his life, different types of soccer and soccer games. And it's just really fascinating the way that people are now interpreting this act of reading and showing us new sides of the theory.
Gaming, let's talk about the text of games for just a moment because there's this fascinating sort of process of learning the game. So there's that efferent aspect of how do I make this character do this? How do I unlock this world? And then you have that embedded idea of like cheat codes. I think all of us as gamers can point to those moments of joy when we finally unlock that secret hidden gem in a game somewhere, and there's sort of an achievement level there that's unlocked. And there's also the idea of myriad possibilities, which I think in some ways have kind of talked back to books like the choose your own adventure books that were popular when I was younger. Like, you have an individual experience with a game, but then within those experiences, you have all of these possibilities depending on the game design. So there's a unique kind of text work there as well.
Yeah, well, so one of the other theories that we base our own idea of player response on is Brian Upton's situational play. And in that, Brian defines what he calls the game is designed. So that's, obviously what is intended by the author. And then there's the game as experience. So as you're saying, when you play a game, it happens one way. It doesn't happen all the myriad ways, right? So it happens in a particular way. So that's the game as experience. But then there's also what he calls the game is understood. And that is everything that we're interested in. It's not just the game as experience, it's the game as I understand it, as a player, as a person, as a part of perhaps even a social group, sort of unpacking all of the pieces of the game. And so a lot of what we talk about is the game as understood and what that means, sort of jumping off of Brian's theory and bringing this idea of reader response to that, and saying, okay, let's value this. Let's say that the game is understood, can be a valuable, critical experience for us. That it's not just that I win, right? And it's not just that I can describe all the features and that I, can sort of that I know all the things I can do. It's not that I have sort of exhausted the game. It's that it's all of the experiences that led up to me loving that game enough to exhaust it, loving it, bringing myself to it, bringing my friends to it. All of those experiences are a valuable, critical package that we can then unpack.
We also talk about, or write about, I guess, but we're talking about it now. Uh, I think it's from Stuart Hall, but the idea of a compliant reading, a negotiated reading, and an oppositional reading of a game as a text, just as you would read other texts or film or anything else. And we draw different parallels there, and we have an entire chapter actually called "Playing Against the Game," which is change, as you're mentioning, like world building, that sort of thing, right? Like you're in a game. One thing we cited was somebody who was a writer for the Audubon Society. And rather than playing Red Dead Redemption 2, which is set in the Old West, in the United States. You have binoculars, and there are a lot of birds in the game. And he goes, it's called like bird watching in 1899 in the article. And that's not how the game was designed, but that's how he's playing the game. We also cite other folks who have done protests in Animal Crossing, right? So these are all different ways, and they're all great, right? They should all be embraced. They're all valued, right? And legitimate. That's the word I was looking for.
I think that speaks so well to literacy and the ways we value texts. I'm curious, how has this work changed, shaped, transformed your work in education and in the research that you're planning to continue to do?
Well, we've got that special issue of the journal coming out. So that should hopefully help. We've had a lot of support from different organizations, which has been great, like the Joan Gans Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop, the Connected Learning Alliance. So a lot of folks in the space of literacy. I was
Jim G.
Jim G. Also, NCTE gave me time on the stage to talk about this. Uh, so it's great to be embraced by that because we cite different literacy organizations in our book because even going back to Perry Nodelman, we cite Perry Nodelman, who also all these folks write about National Writing Project. Also, they just list off things like also texts are like in graphic novels and in film and TV and games. Games is always there, but
Hmm.
nobody took them up on it, in a way. Not as like a literate. There are books about reading games as text, but not in the way of reading games in a sense, a personal response that we're suggesting here.
Yeah.
So the communities have been quite welcoming, and that I think is exciting. Um, One thing I should say also in the bizarre nature of like the world it is now. This is just irks me, but I'll just say it, is that so there's different blaming that goes on in the media these days, the popular
Hmm.
media for kids' learning outcomes. And our book is written for general audience. So it could be book clubs or after school libraries. But in general, what I've been reading as an ed tech professor is the scapegoating of ed tech because schools bought a lot of computers after COVID. And it's the same like, how balanced literacy was scapegoated and we got the quote science of reading, right? Now I'm reading an endless amount of screen phobia articles, which
Right.
like, okay, maybe not do one-to-one computers with everybody, but like, okay, have a class play Walden, and then all of our activities are like card games or offline. Uh, but in this like whole setting here, just to be clear, we actually never suggest that everybody should like be glued to like a screen and like, you know, playing a game. We want these experiences to be social. We try to provide tools for like book clubs and classes. My kid in his school, they have like book clubs and Socratic seminars. They do like, a literature circle when they bring in
Mhm.
film along with books that they're reading. And we're just saying, well, what if you played a game for 15 minutes together as a class and bring that experience into the literature circle? And I
Yeah.
think that's where games like really good ed tech can support learning,
Yeah.
not replace it.
Yeah, we're not interested in having a world where you only play games. For example, one of the, you know, main things that we're so interested in is pairing games and books, right? Thematically, so that we
Mhm.
can dig in. I mean, Walden's an obvious example because it's where we started. Pairing the book with the game makes a lot of sense. But you can also pair, like Matt gave a great example of pairing the Crucible with Werewolf, right? So
Mhm.
you have
Mhm.
an interactive experience which essentially brings to life the themes of a play. And while the students might not appreciate the play as much as, say, the teachers and the adults, they can certainly appreciate those themes when they are experiencing themselves what it feels like to be, you know, accused of being a werewolf, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
having to defend themselves against injustice, right? So I think we're not uh, apologists for games, but we do believe that games should be take their place among important, complicated media. And the truth is that if we can learn to interpret our experiences and talk about our experiences in games more deeply, these could be shared across generations. So it's I see us playing games, right? Well,
Mhm.
how about sit down and play with them and talk about it, right? It actually, you might find out that there's a lot going on there, that they're having a social experience, that they're having a really complicated and interesting strategic experience, that they're having a really maybe an interesting narrative experience that they need to unpack with you. There's all these possibilities. They're not quote unquote just playing a game. They are playing a game. And they might actually need your help interpreting that experience.
I actually have in some talks I've been doing recently, I have a paired text example, sort of as a joke, but not as a joke. With I can't remember the name of the. I was trying to think of it while you were talking. The it was like a psychologist in the 1950s who said that all comic books are going to turn kids into juvenile delinquents,
There you go.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
right?
Wortham. Yeah.
Yeah, worth them, right? And
Yep.
but there were schools that were using comic books in the classroom prior to that because teachers saw the value of reading them, and that just set back, sequential art and all that
Hmm.
storytelling back decades, right? And I have a slide and it shows Wortham with his book and Jonathan Haidt and his book. And I'm not saying like it's just like this broad stroke of like, social media is bad for kids. Okay, we can agree on that, but not everything is social media, right?
Hmm.
Um, right? We shouldn't use a blunt instrument like a hammer when we could be using a scalpel, right?
True.
So
True.
yeah, maybe there are things that should be in classrooms, of course. But if you're having kids play Walden, which doesn't even collect, I mean, this is a plug, but not a plug. It's free. But if you go and play Walden a game EDU, there's no sign in. You don't give any data information. You don't log in, create an account, right? And you're learning experientially. Then you could bring that to a
Hmm.
text. Um, that's infinitely different than like, assuming that, whatever's going on in classrooms. And I just find that with film is one of the predominant mediums of the 20th century, right? And comic
Hmm.
books or like, you know, to sell them in schools, graphic novels are
Right.
also a predominant reading form, right? More accepted now. And there are so many different types of independent video games and personal narratives in games. Gamesforchange.org is a terrific organization that curates a lot of different social impact games. And those need to be in the conversation with young folks, not because it's fun and that's what they're doing, but because it's the predominant storytelling form of the 21st century. And we shouldn't let that slip by because of, media bias
Yeah.
or
Mm-hmm.
nostalgia getting in the way of learning. I'm not teaching my students how to, butter churn and learn cursive.
Right, right.
right? I mean, it's funny, but these are the articles I read in the New York Times and Washington Post every few days now.
Yeah,
And yeah,
there's this interesting baby in bathwater thing that so often happens in education. So I appreciate how both of you have spoken to that of we're not necessarily saying all screens and we're not saying let's get the butter churns out. There's got to be some happy medium there somewhere. And in terms of the scapegoating, I understand that's an easy thing to do, but I think until maybe educational policymakers understand what a norm reference test means, that might be the cheat code. That might actually be the cheat code, because we're always going to be having a deficit conversation as long as that's the method of sort of
right.
understanding this world that we live in and the world that we're preparing people for, which includes screens, movies, comics, social media, a number of things that everyone's using. So I appreciate everything that you said
Podcasts.
there. That's
Can't
right,
forget
a
a podcast.
podcast.
Not to be
I
too
almost
meta,
said
but
retweet, but that's no
oh,
longer a term that I can use. It's been refreshed to something else. So, very well said as far as the kind of digital world that we're living in, and we want to prepare students for and teacher educators for as well. If I'm a listener and I want to find out more about your work, where are some places that I might go?
Well, you can go to our website, which is well played, wellreadgame.com. Let's say that again.
Yes, retake.
Yeah. Well, you can go to our website at well read game.
the well-read game.
Is it the well read
Take
game?
three.
Matt knows better than you. Matt, you
I
say it.
just went on it. I just
All
went
right.
on it.
It's all right.
Okay, you say it.
Okay,
I don't know what it is.
it's okay. So, some of the confusion is the I don't know. It's okay. The title of our book is actually a callback to another book. So, and that's also the name of that journal. But anyway, to find out about our book and also toolkits and other materials, the website is thewellreadgame.com. That is thewellreadgame.com. And of course, the book is on wherever books are sold, online, offline. It's from MIT Press in their Playful Thinking series, and Penguin Random House distributes the book. So you could just also find it by Googling the title, and that will come up.
You're so much better at that than I am, Matt.
Thank you. I have a copy editor. Just kidding.
That's a whole like practiced art. I
Yeah.
love the subtitle "Playing Thoughtfully," the Playing Thoughtfully series. I love that idea. And let me just say, well played to you both. Very well played.
Thank
Um,
you. Oh, I can I
uh,
also mention one thing? I've been
yes.
mentioning this at conferences sometimes, and it sounds kind of antithetical to what we're talking about, but I think it's okay. So, a lot of teachers are already, and we're talking about classrooms here, right? A lot of teachers are often pairing things together, right? You've written about that before, so maybe it's a still image, or I have my students, I just have them do a mise en scène where they interpret a scene from Hidden Figures, right? So, they're looking at all these different types of text, right? And it can be a challenge to say, even to say, play 15 minutes of a game that's on Nintendo Switch in your class, right?
Hmm.
Um, so what I do with my students now is I give them that as an option. And I also have a video, full walkthrough video from YouTube about the whole game. One game is called Venba. Venba is a narrative cooking adventure about an immigrant family from India to Toronto. And boy, it could pair great with the graphic novel that you wrote about, that
Hmm.
curriculum about immigration. And you can play a little bit of the narrative and the cooking puzzle because kids watch that anyway. They watch on Twitch and they watch YouTube playthroughs. It's not going to have the same emotional resonance because you don't have the same agency. So you're not having the same feeling of emotions from making different moral choices. However, it's a nice way to bring in some relevancy into a classroom with different modalities, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Love the idea of options and without some kind of gaming, we haven't even touched like tabletop gaming and some of those areas. I just feel like there's such a resource there and such a natural part of being human, as you mentioned, and connecting with ideas that I don't know how you teach all year long and don't include gaming of some kind in some way in some design. So hopefully the work that you're doing helps people think about that critically, deeply, as far as improving their practice, reflecting, and thinking about some things they can do and are doing.
Well said. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.